In this episode of Man versus Marriage, how do you create a safe place?
The podcast. How good do you want your life to be?
You gotta live on purpose, for a purpose.
It's truly about becoming the best version of yourself that's possible. This is Man vs. Marriage, the podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of Man vs. Marriage. We are just absolutely excited that you're here, that you're a part of the MVSM family. You're listening, engaging. Thank you, you the listener. You super stud, you. So today, we are going to talk about creating a safe place. How did I do that? How did we do that? What does that mean to your marriage? Before I do that, make sure you reach out to us, Coach at manversusmarriagepodcast.com. Jeannie knows the email now because she's mouthing it as I do it. And you can reach out to us on Facebook at MVSM Podcast. And if you want to engage with me as well, look me up on Instagram. Do you know that one, honey? What is it?
Quincy_Moran_.
Woo, this girl, man, she be knowing stuff. What's that? Okay, honey. This is a question that I thought was very important because I wanted to get refreshed on how did this all happen. And these are questions I never want to stop asking. It means a lot to me that we were able to take our marriage and start working on it and the changes we've made. We still got a long ways to go. Anybody that wants to have excellence is always working to improve. That's my opinion. And I want to know for you, how did I create that safe place for us to talk about all of these things, you know, building trust, about sex, about insecurities, about whether we had hope. How did that go? What the heck did I do?
Well, first it came down to us having hard conversations. We had to have the conversations with non-negotiables. What are we allowed to discuss? Are we allowed to discuss everything? And in the beginning, there were some topics that we couldn't touch on yet. We had to take it one thing at a time. And then we got to a place of what was okay. You know, for me, for a long time, feelings and emotions are a weakness. So I wasn't okay with feeling. I wasn't okay with falling apart or having emotions. That took a while for me to process through. And then it took us coming together and saying, I need to be able to process through this and have those emotions and those feelings and not feel like they're being thrown back at me. And I had to do the same for you. We had to agree to allow the other person to feel. Basically what we did is we came up with what we call rules of engagement.
Yeah.
You know, it's not necessarily fighting, but it's being able to have those heated discussions and being able to have intimate conversations, being able to have, personal talks, being able to just tell you where I'm at, how I'm feeling, what's going on, and giving you the same respect to do that. But in those, there are rules of engagement. There are certain things that apply. For me, there are certain words that Quincy will use to remind me, hey, we're not fighting. This is not an argument. I'm just asking you questions. I will be the first to admit, I always go to react mode before I just answer a question. It's a defense mechanism in me that we are working on, but he reminds me constantly, we're just talking. We're just asking questions and talking. I'm not railing you. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm not saying what you're doing is right or wrong. I'm just asking questions. You have to have those rules of engagement.
Yeah, and one of those things, and I want to touch on something briefly, but just to kind of put a bow on that, it's a situation where you sit down, you talk intentionally about it, put your dang phones away, and you create this thing where you give each other permission to speak to each other about these things.
We have what's called no rules conversations.
Now we do. We didn't have them
We
before.
didn't in the beginning. In the beginning, it was hard talks and it was airing out the grievances.
That's right.
And now we've moved on to no rules conversations. And what that is basically the grievances are still there. We still have hard talks. But now there are no rules. I'm not allowed to cut him off and tell him, no, he can't feel that way. He's not allowed to shut me down and tell me I'm wrong. It's the other person has full permission to say what they need to say, however they need to say it, to have the emotions or the feelings that they need to have in the moment. And your job is to listen. Don't take it personal. Don't attack as soon as you hear something. Try to listen past the one word that you're hung up on.
Yeah.
It's intentionally taking the time to reset your mind to say, okay, I need to listen. And if you have to, we've had to do this. That's why I'm saying it. We've had to actually say, okay, no rules conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well-
that we can get the other person into that thought process. Because sometimes you'll say something and your spouse may not know that you're just trying to air out or you're just trying to have a conversation, and it becomes a battle because that preface wasn't put there. It sounds stupid, but if it keeps you from miscommunicating and fighting, do it.
Well, hold that, and we'll come back to how the no rules conversation came about. But one thing I want to kind of go back to that you said that made that made an impression on me, and brought something up in me, is that we all have filters. Now, this is the buzzword that we've come up with through our coaching or counseling, that Rita has taught us, that Bill, Rita's husband, has taught us. We all see things through a certain type of filter, and that comes from how you were raised and what you see. Now, if you go back to that episode about sex, when it came to want and need, I want sex or I need you, honey. When Jeannie, whatever, right or wrong, whenever she would hear want, she would think of this is just a service, and it would turn her off. Whenever she hears I need you, that is something that reaches her on an emotional level, and it's something she gives me that I don't give to anybody else but her. So realize that whether you know this or not, everybody has a blind spot, multiple blind spots. And those blind spots cause filters. And like in the Living Life by Design, one of the first things that she did was she got out this huge pair of sunglasses that were like rose-colored. We all have things that are running through filters. Every time I would tell Jeannie something, and I would hear her say, well, here's the glitch, it would infuriate me.
But I'm running my life through a filter of fear.
Right. And that's where it would come from. And during those times, I didn't take the time to let her feelings be her feelings. But understand, you have filters. You have things that when you hear them or see them, you think of them in a predetermined way. And there are things, there are words, there are situations that you need to redefine in yourself so that you can redefine those areas in your marriage. Is that fair to say?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So number one is like, y'all have to sit down and discuss these rules of engagement. And Coach Rita is like, she's the master at it, honey.
Yeah, she is.
She's the master at sitting in front of you. I mean, she does it virtually. She does it in person, over the phone, whatever it is. She'll do it. She will get you two talking. Listen to what you're saying. And then she'll give you this feedback, these thought-provoking questions, and then she'll teach you how to argue about it, which really it doesn't come down to being an argument. It just teaches you how to communicate harmlessly.
Mm-hmm.
And that was important. And I still remember our first hard talk. And that's a show. We've got to do a show on buzzwords and what buzzwords mean and how they've really changed our marriage for the better, which we will do. But I remember our first hard talk. And that is where the information came up, where I learned that I resented you. I had a lot of resentment that I was blind to. I was operating out of resentment because of how I felt like you forced me to stay in my job, and that it was only about my job. And I had resentment about us not moving to Alabama. That's where these hard talks are, where you kind of get down to the root cause of your attitude towards your spouse. But you've got to create a safe place for them to share it. And like we've said before, you cannot use that against them as a punishment. You can't use it to manipulate them. You can't use it to manipulate them to get what you want and then punish them and bring it up every time. But you create this place using these rules of engagement where you give each other permission to speak into your life. And like you said, and I have it written down here, set the rules for engagement. And then it's also very important to learn how to speak each other's language.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the things that was so hard for you is when I would come up with an idea, you would cringe and go into shutdown mode, if I remember correctly, because it was just another harebrained idea.
No, it was something else to take you away from the house.
That's right, to take me away.
There was always something looming in the back of my mind that the next idea was going to take you out again. You had just started coming back home, and it seemed like every time you would start coming home and things would start to level off and get back to normal, something would happen, something would come up, somebody needed you to help with something.
Right.
And you were gone.
And at first, you know, I would take those things very personally because I felt like you were attacking me, but that's how you felt based on my track record.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like learning those rules of engagement. It was not taking your feelings personally and just letting your feelings be what they are and not trying to explain those away or tell you why you don't feel that way. Now, there was, you know, some heated conversation because you would say, I feel this way. And, you know, I say, hey, that's hard for me to hear because this is actually what I meant by that. So having these rules for engagement are very, very, very helpful. And I'm saying that it might be great for us to get with Coach Rita to kind of write those rules down and maybe throw that out on Facebook. So after this episode, people can go there and they can discuss that with their spouse.
True.
And you know, these things, they go for all your relationships, to tell you the truth. And it's not like you need to create a place where you can be completely open about all your insecurities with everybody you know. That trust is built. That is something that's earned in a relationship. You know, me, I'll just hear great information. I'll just go out and start applying it to everybody. And that's a mistake on my part. Some information is great for everybody. Some information
is not.
It requires boundaries.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that we learned about boundaries and creating a safe place. Then there's also this thing where you sit down for a hard talk. And like Coach Rita has said in the past, every talk doesn't have to be a hard talk. You'll find yourself doing it a lot in the beginning because you're constantly going through these particular situations, and you're learning so much about how your spouse thinks. You're learning about how you think, and it's a scary situation. But you want to create this place of trust. It's got to be like this sacred place where your spouse can pour out. Your wife has got to be able to feel comfortable that she's safe putting these things out there and you're not going to use them against her. I want to advise you to go check out, you know, like 3 of our episodes that kind of center around this particular subject. And it's episode 3 called Don't Take It Personal, episode 4 called Hard Talks, and episode 5, The Art of Asking Questions. I'm convinced that Coach Rita is a Jedi master when it comes to asking questions.
Our own personal Yoda.
The Yoda. Now, one thing that happens is when these questions come out, so do your claws. And you need to know that's okay as long as you're willing to process through it. It takes time. It's a learned skill.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something that is like original equipment, okay? It's a learned skill that you have to refine over time. Now, getting back to no rules conversations. It sounds like an oxymoron, honey, because we're saying there's rules of engagement, and now we're having no rules conversations. So we're not eliminating the rules of engagement. It actually came when we were counseling with Rita, and we were talking about how I'd gotten to a place where I was presenting things, but I was kind of curbing them depending on what your mood or your attitude was, or what I thought was.
You were skating.
I was skating.
You were skating around what it was that you really wanted to say because you weren't sure what my reaction was going to be.
Actually, I was doing it because I was sure what your reaction was going to be. And a lot of the times I was right, but it's still not fair to me or you to feel like we have to skate around a conversation. So then that got into the list of buzzwords, if you will.
Oh, yeah.
That was like, okay, this is a no rules conversation. And look, I'm guilty. I'm guilty of getting butthurt and taking it personal and having to talk myself off the ledge when I realize that I'm just butthurt and taking it personal. And the one that stands out to me distinctly is when we're talking about supper and how I'm getting home late, and it's like, well, if you're not home by this time, we're going to have supper anyway. And my claws came out. I ripped my shirt, started turning green, started swelling up. But at that point, I was taking the conversation very personal. I left the rules of engagement behind because we were having a no rules conversation, but there's still a set of ground rules that you have to use so that you respect the person you're communicating with and you don't take those things personal. You actually talk it out.
Yeah, no rules was basically our way of saying, you're not going to skate. You're going to come at me 100% black and white. There's no gray matter. There's no, there are times where you might need to broach a subject that might be maybe sensitive, and you need to approach it differently because you don't know how the other one is going to take it. Now,
or the timing is bad. The timing is terrible.
Could be bad. If he had a crappy day at work and I've got some bad news I need to break to him, but it's impertinent that I tell him, I have to kind of preface it, and I might skate a little bit until he gets to the point to say, okay, I'm okay to hear this. What's going on? I'm not saying you never do that, but it shouldn't be where you constantly feel the need to be careful and cautious in what you have to say.
Right.
I am the type of person, I just need you to tell me point blank. If you skate around it, it frustrates me because you're leaving my own mind to figure out what it is that you're trying to tell me. And Quincy and I have run across this problem so many times where you have to say, what did you hear me say? So if you or your spouse are like me, you definitely need the rules of engagement and you need the no rules conversation. I prefer no rules conversation. Just tell me what's going on, what needs to happen, where you're at. But it also sets me up to remember the rules of engagement mean I can't yell at you for this and just fly off the handle because you've already prefaced this is a no rules conversation.
Or if it does happen, because it happens, and I know we got to wrap the show up, if it does happen, we've given each other permission to say, hey, why are you taking us this way? It's really hard when we both forget those rules or throw the rules out the window and go at each other, which happens. It happens. But that's all. It's just part of it, It's part of learning and growing.
You're learning each other. You're learning how to communicate. Think about it. When you were a kid and you got in trouble and you had to tell your parent, you constantly, all of us did it. I'm only going to tell them this much information and maybe I won't get in as much trouble. You cannot take that into your marriage. You have to, at some point, grow up, learn how to communicate, learn how the other person hears. There are certain words, we'll go into it later, but there are certain things that he says that trigger childlike memories for me, and I instantly go into combat mode because that's how my dad used to talk to me, and you're not my dad, so who the hell are you to tell me this? You need to know those things. You have to take the time to know your spouse before you can sit down and decide what rules work, what rules don't, what buzzwords you have, what freedom you're giving each other to say, hey, this is not you. I need you to look at me and remember that this is you and me having a conversation, not me and your dad having a conversation. Whatever it may be, you have to take that time and learn the rules.
It's about being strategic, and it's about creating that safe place. And that, use our example, use our journey, but truly it's something that you guys have to create. Now, we're giving you a lot of usable techniques, and for more detail, we'll try to get a short list from Coach Rita and get it published on Facebook. But for now, we are gonna take off. Thanks for listening to Man vs. Marriage, the podcast. Got mad love for you. Roll Tide.
The podcast.
How good do you want your life to be?
It's truly about becoming the best version of yourself that's possible.
This is Man vs. Marriage.
The podcast.